Hello, beautiful people, and welcome to Drawing Down the Stars. I'm Snappy, and thank you for joining me for part 4 of our reading of The Golden Ass or Metamorphoses by Apuleius. This has been such a fun book, a really interesting read, and I'm so excited to be back with you for more. So, just to catch up where we were, last we left off with our man Lucius. He had been staying at the house of Milo, a person he knew through family connections. He had a bill of employment, and he's staying with Milo. Milo is this terrible spendthrift, even though he's got this rich, massive mansion. With him, he has a servant named Fotis. Apuleius and Fotis, well, Lucius, I should say, sorry. Lucius and Fotis have a bit of a tryst. They start falling for each other and they start making love, basically. And at the same time, we have our man Lucius connecting with his aunt Birena. And his aunt Birena tells him to be very concerned of Milo because Milo's wife, Pamphile, is a terrible witch and has all this horrible, horrible type of magic. And then while he's at this dinner party at his aunt's house, he meets this interesting guy, Telephron, who tells him this story about how he was paid money to guard a corpse and how he woke and there was accusations about the wife actually committing and murdering the corpse. So then a mysterious priest of Isis came and resurrected the corpse, and the corpse revealed that witches came and were unable to desecrate the corpse and instead desecrated Telephron, and they removed his nose and his ears, and then there's a big reveal. So then at that night, our man Lucius and one of his servants decide they're going to walk back through the city. They were warned that there are brigands about. It's a very dangerous city. And they come back, they make it back to Milo's house, and in front of Milo's house are 3 men wielding swords, banging on the door. While Lucius, drunk and excited, attacks the men, saying they're brigands, and kills them all 3 in an instant, stabbing each of them in the necks. He then runs into the house in kind of a panic, worried about what could happen, and he goes to sleep. Well, the next day, he's right to be worried because all of a sudden he's surrounded, right? The magistrate comes into the house, they arrest him, they say he killed 3 men, they bring out widows, but the whole time, though, he notices there are people laughing at him, even as they're making these wild accusations. And they move him from the courthouse to the theater, and the whole crowd comes out. And then when they say they're going to reveal the bodies and make him look the people he murdered in the face, it's revealed that they were actually wineskins and that this was a whole big prank played on him as part of the festival to Gelos, the god of laughter. And everyone laughs at poor Lucius. And Lucius is incredibly embarrassed. And he winds up going back home. And when he goes back to Milo's and he goes back with his girlfriend Fotis reveals that she was in on the prank and that she feels incredibly guilty for helping set him up. And so our man Lucius uses this to his advantage, and he manipulates her, and he says, well, I know that you're the apprentice and you work with Pamphile, this witch. I want to see the magic. I want to see what's going on. You got to allow me to see the magic. So he manipulates poor Fotis into helping him see what's going on, and she secrets him away into the spot where he can spy, and he watches as Pamphile strips naked and covers herself in this magic ointment that then turns her into an owl, and she takes off in flight. Well, Lucius sees this, and he's so freaked out and amazed. He's like, I got to do that. I got to do that. I got to do that. So he confronts Fotis and starts demanding, basically confessing his love and that he will do anything for her, even marry her, anything she could do, anything she would want, if only she would help him turn into a bird. experience true magic. So she finally relents and they sneak into Pamphile's lair. And she takes one of these magic ointments and they cover Lucius in the ointment. But instead of turning into an owl, he turns into a donkey, into an ass. Well, now everyone's panicking. And Fotis doesn't know what to do. She's terrified Pamphile's going to return. So she takes Lucius and sticks him in the stables, right? Lucius is freaking out. He's wondering if he shouldn't just attack Fotis and kill her in his donkey form, which he could do easily, but that's also the only one who knows who he is and could save him, so he relents. But as he gets put into the stables, the other animals start attacking him. They don't want him there. They're pissed off at him, right? So he gets pushed out of the stables. And just so happens, as soon as that happens, brigands, thieves come and descend on Milo's house. They break into Milo's house. They break into the sanctuary where he hides all his gold. And they see our man Lucius and decide that he would be the perfect vehicle to carry out all of Milo's gold on. So they strap him all up with all of the stuff they can manage, and they whip him out of Milo's house. Oh, I forgot to mention, before he got sent to the stables, Fotis did tell our man Lucius that if he eats a rose, he'll be turned back to normal. That's important. So he gets kidnapped by the brigands. They carry him out of town, whipping him up the mountain, carrying all this goods, all their stolen begotten gains. They make it to this town. And he finally has a moment away and he notices roses and he sees an opportunity, but he can't. Because if he eats the roses and he turns into a human, the brigands will find him out and will realize that he was a witness to their crime and will kill him. So now he's biding his time, waiting for that opportune moment when he can eat those roses and turn back into a human. And he's stuck who knows where, up some mountain, loaded with stolen goods, with a band of brigands. That's where we left our man Lucius. All right, so let us, excuse me. Apologies. All right, let's bring up our text here and let us return to book 4. All right, encounter with the market gardener. About midday, under a scorching sun, we stopped in a village at a house owned by some elderly friends and acquaintances of the robbers. The friendship even an ass could gather from their first greetings, long conversations, and exchange of embraces. They took some of the things from my back as presents for the old men, and in hushed whispers seemed to be telling them there were proceeds of robbery. Then they relieved us of the rest of the baggage and left us to graze and wander freely in a field beside the house. Mutual lunch with an ass and a horse was not to my taste, however, as yet unused to dining on hay. But I caught sight of a market garden behind the stable, and dying of hunger, trotted in boldly right away. I stuffed on vegetables, raw though they were, and then with a prayer to every god, started to quarter the place to see if there might be a rosebed glowing among the gardens outside. Being alone, I was confident, you see, of being able to devour the remedy in private. While away from the road, I could rise once more from that bowed state of a 4-footed beast of burden, and stand erect as a man again, where no one could see. As I tossed about on a wave of thought, I saw some distance away a leafy wood in a shaded vale, and among the varied plants and flourishing greenery, I saw the crimson hue of glistening roses. In my not wholly animal mind, I judged that the grove, in whose dark recesses glowed the regal splendor of the festive flowers, was a sanctuary of Venus and the Graces. So Venus, of course, the goddess of love, and the Graces, or the Charities, right? Or Charite. These are magical nymphs who bring good fortune. Okay. So with prayer to good fortune and success, I hurtled forward at such a rapid pace, By Hercules, I felt no ass, but transformed to a racehorse in full flight. Yet my outstanding and agile efforts were not enough to outrun wretched fate. For when I reached the place, I found not delicate blushing roses wet with the nectar of celestial dew, springing amidst fortunate brambles and blessed briars, not even a veil at all, only the brim of a river bank hedged in deathly by bushy trees like wild bay, extending pale red cups of blossom, as if they were more fragrant flowers than oleanders have no scent at all, and are deadly poisonous to grazing creatures, though country folk may call them rose laurels. So entangled was I in the threads of fate, I was indifferent to my own safety, and was about to consume those deadly roses willingly. But as I plodded hesitantly towards the flowers to pluck them, a young man with a large stick came running in a fury. I suppose he was the market gardener whose vegetables I'd thoroughly ravaged, suddenly aware of the extent of his loss. When he caught me, he began to thrash away, beating me all over, till I'd have been facing death if I hadn't had the sense to defend myself to the last. I raised my rump and kicked out with my rear hooves time and again, and left him lying badly wounded on the nearest slope. As I broke free and bolted, just then, however, some woman, evidently his wife, looked down the slope and saw him stretched out there half dead. In a trice, she was running towards him, shrieking, arousing pity, and threatening my immediate destruction. And indeed, all the villagers, roused by her grief and in furious rage, set their dogs on me instantly from every side, urging them on to tear me to shreds. I was near to dying then beyond a doubt, seeing those dogs, large in size and many in number, fit to fight bears or lions, gathered and ranged against me. Taking the opportunity that circumstance presented, I turned tail and headed at full speed back towards the stable where we'd halted. But the men, controlling the dogs with difficulty, caught me and tied me to a hook by a strong halter. They started to beat me again, and I'd certainly have been slaughtered if it weren't that the contents of my stomach, squeezed by the thumping blows, full of raw vegetables, weakened by the flux, jutted forth and drove the men away from my poor scarred haunches, some sprayed by the liquid foulness, others deterred by the putrid stench. Feigned exhaustion. Not long afterwards, in the afternoon night or light, the robbers drove us from the stable and loaded me in particular with a heavy burden. A good part of the day's journey done, when I was weary from the miles, weighed down by the pack on my back, staggering from blows of sticks and hobbling lamely on worn hooves, we stopped beside a quiet creek with a winding bend. I seized happily on the moment and formed the perfect plan. I would let my legs buckle and drop to the ground, firmly determined not to rise and walk despite the beatings, prepared to lie there even if they struck me not with a stick but a sword. I judged that, weak and quite exhausted, I'd earned an honorable discharge. The robbers, intolerant of delay and eager for rapid flight, would be certain to split the load on my back between the other two beasts of burden, and then do nothing more serious than leave me as a prey to vultures or wolves. But this brilliant plan of mine was thwarted by wretched luck. The other ass somehow divined and anticipated my scheme. Pretending to exhaustion and falling to the ground with his load, he lay there, the dead, and despite sticks, goads, and efforts to drag him up by ears, tails, and legs on either side, wasn't tempted to rise. In the end, the robbers, tired of waiting for his resurrection, agreed not to linger any longer beside a dead or foundered ass, split the load between me and the horse, drew their swords, hamstrung his legs, dragged him some way from the track, and hurled him, still living, from a high, steep cliff into the valley below. Contemplating the fate of my poor comrade, I determined then to abandon all such schemes and tricks, and show my masters I could be an honest ass. I also gleaned from their talk that we'd soon be stopping for a rest at journey's end, their home and quarters. We climbed a gentle slope and reached our destination. There I was freed of my burden. The goods were unloaded and stashed away, and instead of a bath, I eased my tiredness by rolling in the dust. The Robber's Cave. Time and place demand a description of the Robber's Cave and its surrounds, a test of my skill and a chance to see whether I was merely the ass I seemed in my mind and perception. The mountain was rugged, shaded by leafy forests, and very high. Its precipitous slopes, surrounded by jagged and quite inaccessible rocks, were lined with deep, hollowed out gullies, choked by a mass of thorns, and isolated on every side, forming a natural fortress. From the mountain top, a flowing spring gushed out in a foaming stream and rushed headlong down in silvery falls, then split into several channels, flooding the valley with standing water and covering the land with a marshy lake or sluggishly moving river. Above the cave on the mountainside, there rose a steep-sided tower, strong and solid wattle fencing, fit for penning sheep, flanked the entrance on either side like a narrow path between well-built walls. Take my word for it, it was the hall of a robber band. Nearby, there was nothing except a little hut, badly thatched with cane, where guards, chosen by lot from the rest, kept watch by night, as I later learned. After tying us firmly by halters outside, they stooped down one by one and crept into the cave, where they found the old woman bowed down by the years who, it seemed, was charged with the health and upkeep of that whole band of young men. They flung insults at her. Hey, you, last corpse for the pyre, life's great shame, sole reject of Orcus. Orcus Panoptes, right? The one with the 1,000 eyes who guards. After idling about, amusing yourself all day, aren't you even going to offer us an evening meal after all the risks we've taken? All you do night and day is pour good wine down your greedy throat. The old woman answered, in fright, in a high-pitched, tremulous voice. There's plenty of stew for you, my brave and loyal young saviors, cooked and ready and tender and tasty too. There's plenty of bread and well-rinsed cups, bringing over with wine, and hot water is ready for you to wash. As this, they shed their clothes swiftly, and naked, warmed by a roaring fire, they bathed in hot water, rubbed on oil, and reclined at tables lavishly heaped with food. They barely settled down before another larger troop appeared. Robbers, too, as you quickly saw from the loot they carried, silver and gold and vessels and coins, gold embroidered silks. After warming themselves with a bath, they too couched beside their comrades. They then drew lots as to who should serve. They ate and drank with abandon, downing mounds of meat, banks of bread, and swilling wine like water. They jested raucously, sang deafeningly, bawled abuse at each other, and generally behaved like those semi-human lapiths and centaurs. So, centaurs we know are those half men, half horses, right? Famous for their wildness and brutality. Let's look up what this lapith is. Lapiths. Okay. What does Theoi have to say? Lapiths and centaurs. Okay. Here we go. Interesting. Okay, so it's just a picture. So, let me go back here. What does Wikipedia have to say? The Lapiths were a group of legendary people in Greek mythology who lived in Thessaly in the valley of the Pineos and on the mountain of the Pleion. They were believed to have descended from the mythical Lapithes, brothers of Centaurus, with the two heroes giving their names to the races of the Lapiths and the Centaurs, respectively. The Lapiths are best known for their involvement in the Centaur Machi, a mythical fight that broke out between them and the centaurs during Pirithous and Hippodamia's wedding. Oh, cool. That's interesting. And this connects because we're in Thessaly, right? At Hypata. Okay, let's go back to our text here. Okay. Interesting. Where were we? Okay. Then a brawnier one than the rest spoke up, who stormed Milo's house in Hypata. Besides gaining a vast amount of wealth by our courage, have not only gone back home in one piece, but even it's worth saying, have added 8 more legs to the ranks, while you, riding the Boeotian towns, return without your leader, brave Lamachus, whose life was worth a great deal more, I judge, and with good reason than all the loot you've brought. Destroyed by excess of boldness, that great hero will be remembered with famous generals and kings, while you, though thieves good and true, with your petty servile pilfering, are merely scavengers, haunting the public baths or creeping timidly into old ladies' houses. A member of the second troop answered him. Any fool knows that the large mansions are easier prey than the smaller. Though the big houses have a host of servants, they're keener on their own safety than their master's goods. While frugal men live alone and keep the little, or the more, they have cleverly concealed and guard and defend them more keenly, at the risk of their own lives. Events themselves prove what I say. When we reached Thebes, with its 7 gates, we followed the first tenant of our calling, and inquired in depth about wealthy locals. That led us to Chryseros, a banker, owner of piles of cash, who hid his vast assets with skill, in fear of having to pay the levy. So secluded and alone, in a small but well-secured house, he dressed in rags and lived in squalor, contemplating his gold. We set out to deal with him first, thinking nothing of tackling a solitary man, assuming we'd liberate his riches without any bother. Thieving in Thieves, Lamachus and Alchemists. We lost no time, and as darkness fell, we were stationed at his front door. We agreed not to force them, shatter them, or remove them, for fear the noise would rouse his neighbors and give the game away. So our noble standard bearer, Lamarcus, with proven confidence born of courage, slid his fingers little by little through the keyhole and tried to slip the bolt. But Chryseros, that meanest of bipeds, must have been on watch and observing us for some time. Tiptoeing up in total silence, he suddenly launched a mighty blow and nailed our leader's hand to the door with a long spike. Then, leaving him pinioned there in that deadly trap, he climbed to the roof and called to his neighbors, shouting to each, summoning them by name, crying out that his house was on fire, and all must rally to the common cause. And each in turn, terrified by his own proximity to the danger, came running anxiously to help. What a dilemma that left us in, to desert our comrade or risk arrest. So, with his consent, we agreed a somewhat drastic solution. We severed his arm with a blow at the joint that binds it to the shoulder, and leaving the arm where it was, and staunching the flow of blood with a bundle of rags in case it betrayed our trail, we rushed off with what remained of Lamarcus, our leader. Agitated as we were assailed by the noisy outcry filling the neighborhood, and startled into flight by imminent danger. But he could neither match our speed nor safely be left behind. It was then our hero's noble spirit and outstanding bravery drew from this plaintive appeal and prayer. By the right hand of Mars, he cried, and you, loyalty to our oath, free a good comrade from capture and torture both. Should a brave robber outlast his hand that alone can steal and murder? Happy is the man who chooses to die at the hand of a brother. Failing to convince any of us to slay him, he drew his sword with the hand that was left, kissed the blade over and over, then freely plunged it, a mighty stroke, into the midst of his chest. We paid homage to the strength of a redoubtable general, wrapped his corpse in a linen robe, and committed him to the all-concealing waves, and there Lamarcus lies, a whole element his grave. And Alchemist, too, though he ended his life in a manner worthy of his powers, failed to win fate's approving nod. For all his careful plans, he had broken into an old woman's cottage while she was asleep upstairs, and though he should have given her throat a squeeze and ended her life right there, he chose instead to hurl her possessions through a wide window, one at a time for us to carry off later. He heaved the whole contents out, but unwilling to leave even the bed where the old lady was sleeping, he rolled her off the mattress and dragged it and the sheets away, planning to drop them through the casement too. But the evil old woman clung to his knees and pleaded, "Oh, my son, you're just giving a wretched crone's shabby junk to those rich neighbors next door." Her cunning words fooled Alchemist, who thought she was telling the truth, and afraid no doubt that all he had dropped would indeed be snatched by her neighbors, he convinced himself he was wrong. So he leaned from the window to make a thorough survey of the situation, and especially to judge the wealth of the house next door she'd mentioned. As he emptied this, the old sinner suddenly gave him a shove, a weak one, but unexpected. While he was hanging out, intent on his observation, it sent him head first, and he fell from no mean height onto a huge rock near the house, shattering his ribs. We found him vomiting guts of blood from his chest, and after telling us what happened, left this life without suffering long. We buried him as we had Lamarcus, and gave our leader a worthy squire. Wow. Thieving in Plataea, the bear's skin. Doubly assailed by their loss, we abandoned our attempts on Thebes and descended on the next city, Plataea. There we picked up the gossip about a certain Demochares, who was funding a gladiatorial show. Now he, a man of noble birth and great wealth and generous nature, was about to mount an entertainment as brilliant as his fortune. Who would have the talent, the eloquence, the wise, the very words to describe each item in that extravaganza? There were gladiators known for their strength, animal herd handlers of proven skill, and criminals without hope of reprieve, who'd provide a meal and fatten wild beasts. There were movable structures of wood, scaffolding towers like houses on wheels, covered with lively paintings, ornate cages for savage creatures, and how many of those there were, and what fine specimens. He'd selected those tombs for condemned men with care, had even imported animals from abroad, and amongst them, deploying the vast resources of his whole estate, he brought together a congregation of massive wild bears to furnish a dramatic spectacle. There were bears hunted down by his own staff and taken alive. There were those acquired as expensive purchases, and some presented as gifts to him in rivalry by his friends. He had all these creatures well fed and tended with scrupulous care. But these grand and glorious preparations for the public's pleasure failed to escape envy's baneful eye. Exhausted by long confinement, emaciated from the scorching heat, and listless from lack of exercise, the bears were ravaged by a sudden epidemic, their number reduced to almost nothing. Let out to die, the remnants of their carcasses lay scattered in the streets, and the poor in their ignorance, with no choice in what they ate, seeking free meat for their shrunken bellies, the vilest of supplements to their diet, ran to take advantage of these random banquets. Seizing our opportunity, Balbus here and I devised a cunning scheme. We picked the bear of the greatest bulk and carried it to our hideout, as if for eating. Once there, we carefully stripped the flesh from the hide, taking care to keep the claws and leave the head intact down to the neck. We flayed the whole skin neatly, sprinkled it with fine ash, and pegged it in the sun to dry. While the celestial fires were removing all the moisture, we stuffed ourselves bravely with the meat and handed out duties for the execution of our scheme as follows. One of us, the bravest and the strongest of our band, would volunteer to dress in the skin and imitate a bear. Once he had been introduced to Demarchus's yard, taking advantage of the dead of night, he could easily force an entrance for us. The cleverness of the plan prompted several of our brave lads to offer themselves for the task, but by unanimous acclaim, Thrasyleon was chosen and undertook to run the hazard of a risky stratagem. So he hid himself serenely in the bearskin, now soft and flexible and easily donned. We stitched the edges up tightly, and though the seam was neat, we still concealed it in the shaggy hair. Then we forced the head over Thrasyleon's own and pulled the hollow neck down to his throat, with holes at the eyes and small ones at the nose for breathing, and led our brave comrade, now transformed into the creature, to a cheap cage we'd already bought, into which he crawled with vigorous effort, quickly and unaided. Thrasyleon's fate. Now everything was ready for the rest of our ruse. We forged a letter in the name of a certain Nicanor, a Thracian, a close acquaintance of Demochares, making it appear that as an act of friendship he was offering his spoils from hunting to adorn the show. Then late in the evening, under the cover of darkness, we took Thrasyleon in his cage to the house, along with the counterfeit letter. He was so astounded by the creature's size and delighted by this timely gift from his friend, he counted out 10 gold pieces from his purse at once for us, the bringers of delight, or so he thought. Then, since novelty will always stir desire for instant viewing, a great crowd appeared to marvel at the beast. But our cunning Thrasyleon escaped close inspection by pawing the air and threatening them. The citizen cried out again and again, with single voice, that Demochares was fortunate, no blessed in thwarting ill fortune by somehow acquiring this new arrival, while he commanded it to be taken to his parkland and handled with the utmost care. Here I intervened. Caution, sir. This bear, tired from the hot sun and a lengthy journey, ought not to join a crowd of other animals who are not, as I hear, in the best of health. Why not employ an open, airy corner of the house, or a place beside some water which would cool him? These creatures make their lairs, you know, in dense groves or damp caves by pleasant springs. Nervous of my warning, and thinking of the mounting total of his losses, he found no reason for demurring and readily allowed us to place the cage where we thought best, and where quite willing, I said, to keep the bear company tonight, and see that hot and tired as he is, he has accustomed food and water at just the right times. Don't trouble yourselves about that, he replied. My staff by now have had plenty of practice feeding bears. So we said our farewells and left. We walked beyond the town gate and found a mausoleum in a secluded and isolated spot, distant from the road. The coffins of the dead, who now were ash and dust, were half hidden by the products of age and decay, and we broke open several at random, to serve to hide the loot we anticipated stealing. Then, in accord with the rules of our profession, we waited in the moonless night for the hour when deep sleep invades and conquers mortal hearts. We placed our troops, armed with swords, at the very doors of Demochares' house, as a pledge of our intention to attack. Thrasyleon played his part to perfection, choosing that thief's moment of the night to creep from his cage, swiftly slay the guards who lay nearby with his sword, kill the doorkeeper, snatch the key, and fling open the doors. In we rushed at once, and penetrated to the depths of the house. He pointed to the storeroom, where he'd eagerly observed a vast quantity of silver being placed that evening. We broke in at once, in force, and I ordered my comrades to carry off as much gold and silver as they could, hide it in those chambers of the dead, most reliable of guardians, and in a trice hurried back to steal a second load. I would wait on their behalf and keep careful watch by the entrance till they'd quickly returned, and the figure of a bear lumbering round the yard seemed designed to scare off any of the servants who might wake, who, on such a night, no matter how brave and strong, seeing the monstrous form of that vast creature, would not take to their heels, bolt the bedroom door behind them, and hide there, shivering and trembling. It was all well planned, our dispositions soundly made, but disastrous events intervened. While I anxiously awaited my comrade's return, one of the servants, disturbed by the noise, an act of the gods, I suppose, crept quietly out and saw the creature on the loose, ambling round the yard. He retraced his steps in total silence and let all the household know, somehow, what he'd seen. In a flash, the whole house was filled with a crowd of servants, lighting the dark with torches, lamps, candles, tapers, and whatever else illuminates the light. Not a one of them emerged unarmed. Each held spear or club or naked sword as they ran to the entrance, calling the hounds, the long-eared kind with the bristling coats, and setting them on the beast to subdue him. As the uproar grew, I quietly backed away from the house, but hidden by a door I caught a glimpse of Thrasyleon's marvelous defense against the dogs. Though he was in mortal danger, he never forgot his role or his courage, as he fought those gaping jaws, as if Cerberus himself. Cerberus is the three-headed dog who guards the underworlds, who's also an avatar of Hecate. As long as life was in him, he played out the task he'd chosen, now retreating, now resisting with every turn and twist of his body, until he retreated from the house. But even though he'd won his way to the open street, he could find no means of escape, since all the dogs from the neighboring alleys, numerous and fierce, joined a host of hounds from the house in pursuit. I witnessed the whole wretched fatal spectacle, our Thrasyleon ringed, besieged by packs of savage dogs, and lacerated by countless bites. At last, unable to endure such torment any longer, I mingled with the crowd of people surging round, and like a good comrade, tried to help as best I could, by trying to dissuade the most vociferous, crying, "What a waste! It's a crime to kill so large a beast. It's one that's worth its weight in gold." But my skill in oratory was no help to the poor lad, for a big, strong fellow came running from the house, and in an instant struck a spear right through the bear's body. Then another did the same, and now their fear was gone. Others swiftly vied to use their swords at close quarters. Thrasyleon, the pride of our group, his breath gone but not his steadfastness, worthy now of immortality, never betrayed his pledge by shouting or even screaming, but continued to growl and roar like a bear, though torn by the teeth and wounded by the blades, and bore his current misfortune with noble fortitude, winning eternal glory for himself, though surrendering his life to fate. He'd so terrified the crowd, filling them with fear, that till dawn, or rather till full daylight, no one dared to lay a finger on his motionless corpse, until at last a butcher, with a glimmer of confidence, timidly and gingerly approached the creature and slid open the skin to find a noble robber, not a bear. Thus was Thrasyleon too, lost to us, yet never will he be lost to glory. Then we swiftly gathered up those spoils the faithful dead had guarded, and as we fed Plataea at the double, we turned this thought over and over in our minds. There's a reason loyalty is lacking in this life. She's taken herself off to the dead and joined the shades. Disgusted at our betrayals, and so exhausted by the weight of our burdens, wearied by the roughness of the road, and lacking 3 of our friends, we brought the spoils you see before you. The captive. His story ended. The robbers poured a libation of pure wine from golden cups in memory of their dead comrades. Some sang songs in honor of their god Mars and went to sleep. As for us, the old women brought boundless, generous quantities of fresh barley, so the horse at least thought himself a Salian priest's banquet, though I, who'd never eaten this stuff before, except ground fine and cooked as porridge, had to search around for the corner where they piled the leftover bread. My jaws ached with hunger, near draped in cobwebs from long neglect, and I gave them a thorough workout. Behold, in the night, The robbers awoke, decamped, variously equipped, some armed with swords, some dressed as ghouls. They suddenly vanished. I kept bravely, vehemently chewing away. Even impending drowsiness had no effect on me. When I was Lucius, I'd leave the table filled by one or two slices of bread. But now I had a vast belly to serve, and was already gulping down my third basketful as dawn's clear light caught me at my labors. Roused at last by an asinine sense of shame, but with extreme reluctance, I trotted off to slake my thirst in a nearby stream. At this moment the robbers returned, anxious and preoccupied with not a single piece of goods, not even a worthless rag, despite their swords and show of force, and the presence of the whole troop. They'd only managed to snatch a girl, though to judge from her refined manner, a child of one of the region's noble families. Even to an ass like me, she seemed a girl to covet. Sighing, plucking at her hair and clothes, she entered the cave, and once inside, they tried to soothe her fears with talk. Don't fear for your life or honor, they said. Just bear with our need for money. Necessity and poverty led us to this profession. Your parents, however mean they are, won't hesitate to pay a ransom for their great store of riches, for their own flesh and blood. How could this girl's fears be soothed by this sort of blather? She wept uncontrollably, her head between her knees. So they called the old woman aside and told her to sit beside the girl and console her as best she could with gentle words, while they got on with their trade. The girl, though, could not be kept from tears by anything the old woman could say, but cried all the louder, her breasts heaving with sobs, till it even drew tears from me. Alas, she cried, torn from so dear a home, from family and servants and my revered parents, the unhappy spoil of theft become enslaved, and shut like a slave in a stony cell, deprived of all the comforts I was born and raised to, tormented by uncertainty as to whether I'll survive or be butchered by these thieves. This dreadful gang of sword fighters, how can I help crying or even endure alive? So she lamented. And then, exhausted by the pain in her heart, the strain on her throat, and the tiredness of her weary body, she allowed her drooping eyelids to fall in sleep. But her eyes had only been shut an instant, when at once, like a woman possessed, she started up and began to torment herself more violently than before, pounding her breast and tearing her pretty face. When the old woman asked her why she plunged her in fresh grief, she only heaved a deeper sigh and cried, "Oh, now it's certain. Now I'm totally lost and done for, and not a hope of rescue. I must find a rope or sword or a nearby precipice." At this, the old woman grew angry and asked her with a scowl what on earth she was crying for, and what had roused her from deep sleep and provoked that loud wailing again. "You think to cheat my young men of their profit from this rich venture, do you? Persist, and I'll make sure those tears are wasted. Robbers pay them little attention anyway, and see you roasted alive." Her dream. Terrified at her words, the girl kissed the old woman's hands and cried, "Mother, forgive me, and in my harsh misfortune, show a little human kindness. The experiences of a long life have not, I think, exhausted the springs of pity in that revered gray head of yours. Just gaze on this calamitous scene. There's a young man, my cousin, the foremost of his peers, 3 years older than I, whom the whole city look on like a son. We were raised together from earliest childhood, inseparable playmates in our little house, even sharing room and bed. With the affections of a sacred love, he was pledged to me and I to him, engaged by contract, with promises of marriage, registered formality with our parents' consent. On the eve of our wedding, he sacrificed at shrines, at public temples, accompanied by a crowd of both our kin. Our whole house was decked with laurel, lit by torches and echoing with the wedding hymn. There was my poor mother clasping me to her and pinning on the prettiest marriage finery, pressing sweet kisses on my lips and uttering anxious prayers that grandchildren might appear, when suddenly a warlike gang of men with swords brandishing their hostile naked blades. They turned their attention not to murder or plunder, but marching in a tight, packed, close formation through our room snatched me, ill and fainting from the cruelest fears, out of my mother's trembling arms without a single person fighting back or offering the slightest resistance. So my lover's wedding was prevented, as Cybele thwarted Attis and married life denied him, as war denied Protestilaus. Oh, wow. So Cybele, we know, is the Phrygian goddess of the mountain, the great mother, and thwarted Attis. That is, she stopped Attis from engaging with the nymphs and being bound in the mud. She brought the beast, which caused him to rise out of the mud and in madness castrate himself and pursue divine imitation. And, denied him married life, I guess, basically, right? Since he castrated himself. Let's see who Protestilaus is. I'm not familiar offhand. Okay. We will see here. Protestilaus was a hero in the Iliad who is venerated at cult sites in Thessaly and Thrace. Protestilaus was the son of Iphiclus, a lord of many sheep. As grandson of the eponymous Phylacos, he was the leader of the Phylacians. Hyginus surmised that he was originally known as Iolus, not to be confused with Iolus, the nephew of Hercules, but was referred to as Protestilaus after being the first, Protos, to leap ashore at Troy, and thus the first to die in the war. Oh, wow. The first to die in the war. Cool. Interesting. Let's go back to our book. Okay. A moment ago, a cruel dream renewed, or rather crowned my troubles. I saw myself after being dragged violently from the house, my bridal suite, my room, almost my very bed, crying my unfortunate lover's name through the pathless wilds, while he denied my embrace, drenched with perfumes, still in garland with flowers, followed the trail of alien feet. Then in my dream, as he lamented his lovely young bride's kidnap with pitiful cries and called to passers-by for aid, one of the thieves, infuriated by his relentless pursuit, snatched up a huge stone at his feet and, striking my unfortunate lover, killed him. That dreadful vision was what terrified me and shook me out of my dark sleep. Heaving a sigh, the old woman spoke again. Be of good heart, young mistress. Don't let a dream's vain fantasy disturb you. In the first place, dreams that come in daytime are always said to prove untrue. And secondly, a nightmare often signifies the opposite. For example, being beaten, weeping, someone slicing at your throat will announce a large and profitable deal, while laughter, stuffing sweet pastries, or lovemaking foretell sad spirits, bodily weakness, and every sort of loss. Come, let me divert you with an old wives' tale, one that makes a pretty story. And she began. All right. The tale of Cupid and Psyche, fatal beauty. In a certain city there lived a king and queen, who had 3 daughters of surpassing beauty, though the elder 2 were extremely pleasing. Still, it was thought that they were only worthy of mortal praise, but the youngest girl's looks were so delightful, so dazzling, no human speech in its poverty could celebrate them, or even rise to adequate description. Crowds of eager citizens and visitors alike, drawn by tales of this peerless vision, stood dumbfounded, marveling at her exceptional loveliness, pressing thumb and forefinger together and touching them to their lips, and bowing their heads toward her in pious prayer, as if she were truly the goddess Venus. Soon the news spread through neighboring cities and the lands beyond its borders that the goddess herself, born from the blue depths of the sea, emerging in spray from the foaming waves, was now gracing the earth in various places, appearing in many a mortal gathering, or, if not that, that earth, not ocean, had given rise to a new creation, a new celestial emanation, another Venus, and as yet a virgin flower. Day by day, rumor gathered pace, and the fame of her beauty spread through the nearby islands, the mainland, and all but a few of the provinces. People journeyed from far countries and sailed the deep sea in swelling throngs to witness the sight of the age. Venus's shrines in Paphos, Cydnos, and even at Kythera itself were no longer their destinations. Her rites were neglected, her temples abandoned, her cushions were trodden underfoot, the ceremonies uncelebrated, the statues ungarlanded, the altars cold and forsaken with ashes. The girl it was that people worshipped, seeking to propitiate the goddess's great power in a human face. When she walked out of mourning, they would invoke transcendent Venus in feast and sacrifice. And as she passed through the streets, crowds would shower her with garlands and flowers. The extravagant bestowal of the honors due to heaven on a mere mortal girl roused Venus herself to violent anger. She shook her head impatiently and uttered these words of indignation to herself with a groan. Behold me, the primal mother of all that is, the source of all the elements, the whole world's bountiful Venus, driven to divide my imperial honors with a lowly human. Is my nature established in heaven to be traduced by earthly pollution? Am I to suffer the vagaries of vicarious reverence, a share in the worship of my divinity? Is a girl destined to die to tread the earth in my likeness? Was it nothing that Paris, that shepherd, whose just and honest verdict was approved by Almighty Jove, preferred me for my matchless beauty to those other two great goddesses? But if she'll reap no joy from usurping my honors, whatever she may be, I'll soon make her regret that illicit beauty of hers. And she swiftly summoned Cupid, that son of hers, a winged and headstrong boy, who with his wicked ways and contempt for public order, armed with his torch and his bow and arrows, goes running at night in other people's houses, ruining marriages everywhere, committing such shameful acts with impunity, and doing not an ounce of good. Venus, with her words, rousing his natural impudence and wildness to new heights, led him to the city and showed him Psyche in person. Such was the girl's name, and told the tale of her rival's loveliness, moaning and groaning in indignation. I beg you, she said, by the bond of maternal love, by you, arrows' sweet wounds, by the honey licking of your flames, revenge your mother fully. Exact harsh punishment from defiant beauty. One act of yours, pursued with a will, would accomplish all. Let the girl be seized by violent burning passion for the most wretched of men, one to whom fortune has denied rank, wealth, even health, one so insignificant there is none on earth equal to him in misery. With this, she kissed her son long and tenderly, with parted lips then, seeking the nearest strand of tide-swept shore, stepped on rose-tinted feet over the trembling crests of the foaming waves, and stood once more on the crystal surface of the deep. The ocean instantly obeyed her wishes, as if commanded in advance. The Nereids, they were there. Those are water nymphs, water spirits, singing a choral song. Portunus, the god of harbors, with his sea-green beard. Salacia, Neptune's wife, her lap alive with fish. And Palamon, the dolphin's little charioteer. That's also the son of Salacia and Poseidon. Wow. Troops of Tritons, too, leapt here and there in the water. One blew softly on a melodious conch. Another with a silk parasol shielded her from the sun's hostile blaze. Another held a mirror to his mistress's eyes, while yet more swarmed, harnessed in pairs to her chariot. Such was the throng escorting Venus as she moved out to sea. So Tritons are those like kind of serpent legged, usually two serpent kind of legs. Okay. And they're kind of nymph spirits too of the oceans. All right. The tale of Cupid and Psyche, the little oracle. Psyche, for all her conspicuous beauty, reaped no profit from her charms. Gazed at by all, praised by all, no one, neither prince nor commoner, wishing to marry her, sought her hand. They admired her divine beauty, of course, but as we admire a perfectly finished statue, her two elder sisters, whose plainer looks had never been trumpeted through the world, were soon engaged to royal suitors, and so made excellent marriages. But Psyche was left at home, a virgin, single, weeping in lonely solitude, ill in body and sore at heart, hating that beauty of form the world found so pleasing. So the wretched girl's unhappy father, suspecting divine hostility, fearing the gods' anger, consulted the ancient Milesian oracle of Apollo at Didyma. Wow. So now we're getting a famous site of Apollo, and Apollo is that god of light and of oracles, right? Famously, the lord of Delphi, of Delos. All right. With prayer and sacrifice, he asked the mighty god for a man to marry the unfortunate girl. Apollo, though Greek and Ionian too, favored the author of this Milesian tale with a reply in Latin. High on a mountain crag, decked in her finery, lead your daughter king to her fatal marriage, and hope for no child of hers born of a mortal, but a cruel and savage serpent like winged evil, flying through the heavens and threatening all, menacing every soul on earth with fire and sword, till Jove himself trembles, the gods are terrified, and rivers quake, and the Stygians shades beside. The king, blessed till now on hearing this utterance of sacred prophecy, went slowly from home in sadness, and told his wife the oracle's dark saying. They moaned, they wept, they wailed for many a day, but the dire and fatal hours soon approached. The scene was set for the poor girl's dark wedding. The flames of the wedding torches grew dim with black smoky ash. The tune of the hymen's flute sounded in plaintive Lydian mode. Hymen is the god of marriage. Lydian mode, that's a type of scale in music. And the marriage hymn's cheerful song fell to a mourning wail. The bride-to-be wiped tears away from her flame-red bridal veil. The whole city grieved at the cruel fate that had struck the afflicted house, and public business was interrupted as a fitting show of mourning. But the need to obey the divine command sent poor Psyche to meet the sentence decreed. The ritual preparations for the fatal marriage were completed in utter sorrow, and the living corpse was led from the house, surrounded by all the people. Tearful Psyche walked along, not in wedding procession, but in her own funeral cortege. Her parents, saddened and overcome by this great misfortune, hesitated to cry out the dreadful deed, but their daughter herself urged them on. Why torment a sorrowful old age with endless weeping? Why exhaust your life's breath, which is my own, with this constant wailing? Why drown in vain tears those faces I love? Why wound my eyes by wounding your own? Why tear your white hair? Why tear your white hair? Why beat the breasts that fed me? Let this be your glorious reward for my famous beauty. Too late you see the blow that falls is dealt by wicked envy. When nations and countries granted me divine honors, when with one voice they named me as the new Venus, that's when you should have mourned and wept and grieved as if I were dead. I know now. I realize that her name alone destroys me, led me now to that cliff the oracle appointed. I go swiftly towards this fortunate marriage. I go swiftly to meet this noble husband of mine. Why delay? Why run from the coming of one who will be born for the whole world's ruin? With this, the girl fell silent and went steadfastly on, accompanied by the throng of citizens around her. They came to the steep mountain crag, decreed and placed the girl as commanded on its very top. then deserted her, one and all. They left behind the bridal torches, lighted on the way and now extinguished by their tears, and heads bent low began with their journey home, where her unhappy parents, exhausted by this dreadful blow, shut themselves in the darkness of their room and resigned themselves to the endless night. Meanwhile, Psyche on the topmost summit, frightened, trembling, and in tears, was lifted by a gentle breeze, as soft whispering zephyr, steering her dress around her, and causing it to billow its tranquil breath, carrying her softly down the high cliff slopes to the valley below, where it laid her tenderly on a bed of flowering turf. So Zephyr is the spirit, the daimones of the west wind, and was a lover of Apollo. Book 5. Okay. So this is where we end. Wow. So amazing. We're getting another side story, the story of Cupid and Psyche. Beautiful. So this is a lot of fun. I hope you guys are really enjoying this. I'm certainly enjoying this. It's great to see what's happening to Lucius and now what's going to happen with this beautiful story of Psyche and Cupid. I wonder how it's all going to tie together and where Lucius is going to wind up next. Well, thank you guys so much for joining me and listening to me read. This has been so much fun. I'm absolutely loving this book, and I hope to see you again tomorrow when we continue with Book 4. So, peace and love. Thanks again. Like and subscribe, and tune in tomorrow for more The Golden Ass or Metamorphoses by Apuleius.